The Houston Rockets roster going into 2022 is pretty different to what it looked like just 12 months ago, and to many fans, this doesn't seem like a team ready to make a playoff push quite yet. They're young and exciting on paper, but in a highly talented Western Conference, it seems like they're destined to be bottom feeders. However, as a diehard fan of this team, I have some reasonable optimism and believe this team is certainly talented enough to be competitive next season at the very least, and potentially even be a chance to make the play-in tournament. In today's video, I'll be discussing my reasons why I believe that is the case, looking at the Rockets roster heading into next season and the upgrades that they've made this offseason that I believe will see them make some improvements in 2022. Before we start, if you're new here and enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe. For more NBA content like this, I'm trying to reach 18,000 subscribers, so all support would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, with that all being said, let's talk about the Houston Rockets. Firstly, let's talk about the new players added to the Rockets roster this past season, starting with the draftees. The big name selection of the draft for Houston was Jalen Green with the 2nd overall pick, and so far, all things seem to be pointing towards that his selection was the right one. Green balled out in his handful of games in the Summer League, averaging over 20 points per game on ridiculously efficient shooting splits of 51, 53, 93. As he has said countless times, he's got a chip on his shoulder. And I think we're going to see that chip lead to some fantastic play next season alongside guys like Kevin Porter Jr. and Christian Wood, which is very exciting to think about. I've talked about the fit of Jalen Green on this Rockets roster many times before now, but briefly for now, Green is a fluid scorer and is arguably one of the best offensive players in this draft class. His athleticism is fantastic and allows him to score around the rim in a variety of ways, but it also allows him to excel as a cutter, which I personally think would be very important to have alongside John Wall and Porter Jr. Green's scoring touch in general is very good too. He's crafty with his dribble moves, and we saw in the Summer League how deep his arsenal can potentially go, as he hit numerous step-back jumpers, pull-up J's, and hit tough layups. Again, they are all very promising signs. The other rookies who participated in the Summer League were Sengun, Usman Garuba, and Josh Christopher, all who showed great potential as well, particularly Sengun and Garuba, Sengun on offense and Garuba defensively. Christopher was a bit poor at times, having some inefficient outings, but he's still shown immense raw talent at times, and it would be ludicrous to over-criticize him after a couple of Summer League games. We've seen in the past how that can turn out. So overall, it was a great Summer League for the Rockets rookies, and one that gives us fans a good sign heading into next season. Again, I don't want to overreact, it's just the Summer League after all, but the Rockets rookies have looked great early on. Moving on to free agency, the Rockets only made 2 significant signings this offseason, and one of them was a re-signing, which we'll start with now. That player we re-signed was David Nwaba, which is a deal that I love. Nwaba is a really good older piece for this young core, and last season was a quality role player until he got injured. He was a big reason behind the Rockets' success early on in the season before he had that wrist injury. He was underpinning their solid defense that helped them win 7 straight games at one point. Obviously, the Rockets' defense fell off a cliff after he got injured, having their defensive rating plummet from 112 to 119, so it's evident that his return is only going to do positive things for Houston. His leadership and talent is overall underappreciated in my eyes, not by just NBA fans, but Rockets fans as well. It's a big reason why I'm so thrilled to see the Rockets sign him on for a further 3 seasons. The defense he's going to bring to the table when he returns is much needed. So again, I'm a huge fan of this contract for the Rockets. Moving on to probably the Rockets' biggest offseason addition, Houston signed Daniel Tice for 4 years on a decently sized contract, about $9 million a year. I was a bit confused by his signing at first, but I don't think it's terrible at all now, especially after the Rockets decided to let Kelly Olynyk walk. Tice can space the floor reasonably well and fill that shooting void Olynyk will leave, at least slightly. Tice did shoot 32% from deep last season, which is serviceable for a big man. It certainly doesn't make him a liability. But the biggest thing that Tice will add is his defense. One problem with the Rockets last season all year long was a lack of rim protection. They got cooked by guys like Jokic, Adebayo, etc. all year long. So to add in Tice is going to be an enormous boost on that end, like Nwaba will be on the wing. Tice's defensive versatility is going to make the Rockets much harder to get past than last season, and having young guys like Usman Garuba back him up, who have a ton of defensive potential, is more reason to believe that the Rockets will be competitive once again next season. So those are the off-season additions for the Rockets, but there are plenty of other guys on this roster who will help enable Houston to be a competitive side next season. The obvious one is Kevin Porter Jr., who seems primed for a breakout year. After a strong finishing to his 2021 campaign, KPJ has shown flashes of being an all-star caliber player next season with his ever-improving playmaking and scoring abilities. KPJ demonstrated an increasing capability to playmake last season, particularly out of the pick and roll, so having more sets run between him and a healthy Christian Wood is only going to do positive things for him. He's also being paired with some new young gun rookies who can be brilliant off-ball players around him, such as Jalen Green and Josh Christopher, as they both have elite athleticism that will make them incredibly capable and dangerous off-ball weapons that KPJ can utilize with his ever-improving passing. I mean, Porter went from averaging 2 assists per game in Cleveland to over 6 in Houston. KPJ is already just beginning to take his leap into stardom, and it's really exciting to see. Considering the kind of roster that KPJ had built around him last season compared to now, there's no doubt that the squad has improved, and in turn, that should allow for rapid development in his game and potentially lead to a breakout season, which as a Rockets fan, I am so excited for, and it will definitely help us make a push towards the bottom end of the playoffs. Christian Wood is also going to be an important element of this team moving forward. Wood averaged a very efficient 21-9 last season and almost certainly would have been an all-star and top 3 candidate for the most improved player if it weren't for his injury. I think his injury last season showed the magnitude of impact he has on this team and how he is truly one of the most underrated players in the league. After going down, the Rockets lost 20 straight games, and when he came back, the Rockets played at a level just below 500. I feel like if Harden had an attitude change and didn't give up straight away on this team and instead tried things out with Wood, they would have been a really successful duo. Their pick and roll action was incredible, and it was evident how amazing of a player C. Wood can be last season. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, but I still think Wood is making the best of this situation, which is great to see. And in the end, I think he'll reap the benefits of staying true with this young Rockets core. Finally, some other key members of this roster that I want to focus on are Jae'Sean Tate and John Wall. Jae'Sean Tate was elite for the Rockets this past season and should be an essential part of this team moving forward. I seriously cannot praise him enough. He's the heart and soul of the Rockets team and always gives 110% effort every minute he's on the floor, earning all his time out there. His shooting is improving, he's a terror inside even though he's undersized, and his defense can be just ridiculous, especially for a player that just came into the league. The physicality that he brings, even when it seems to be a mismatch, is brilliant. He's an older than average rookie, now going into his sophomore season, but having spent some time in the Australian Professional League, he's been able to provide immense value even if it doesn't show up in the box score. And I think he'll continue to be a valuable element of this team moving forward into 2022. Finally, John Wall, who is surprisingly and also not surprisingly still on the Rockets roster. I'm not sure how Houston will utilize John Wall next season. It'll be interesting to see how they favor the young guys compared to him. But while him remaining on the roster is not exactly ideal, I definitely don't view it as a bad thing either. Wall will be a fantastic leader and mentor for the younger guards on the roster, and that can help them develop. Wall is still a solid player as well. He's not bad by any means, and for a majority of last season, he was the only player on this roster who could create any sort of offense for Houston, so his play on the team is definitely going to keep them competitive for the near future. Again, assuming he isn't traded anytime soon. So those are all the players I want to talk about on the Rockets today that I believe will make a significant impact for this team next season. But how good can the Rockets actually be next season? And why am I so high on them? Well, the big reason why I'm keeping faith is because the Rockets were unhealthy a majority of last season. They lost so many key players for big stretches, like John Wall, Christian Wood, and David Nwaba. And when they were healthy, they flashed potential and were actually very competitive. Look at the games such as the win over the Bucks late in the year. Another reason why I see improvement in this team is because the roster is a lot better and it's fixed a lot of their issues from last season too. I've obviously gone over their roster upgrades already, but what's important to note with them is that all of them focused on shot creation and front court defense. Those factors I just mentioned were the two big things that held Houston back last season. So to add guys like Jalen Green into the mix, bring in defensive-minded pieces like Tice and Nwaba, that's going to be so beneficial for the Rockets moving forward. If they're healthy next season and Jalen, KPJ, and Seawood mesh well, they can do some solid damage and potentially finish higher than expected. Realistically, I'd have the Rockets maybe 12th to 14th, around that range, but I don't think it's out of the picture to see them rise to like the 11th or 10th seed and make the play-in tournament. It's probably a stretch and certainly a thing easier said than done to do, but I believe it's definitely possible for this team. But overall, these are my thoughts on the Houston Rockets. In the end, I'm happy with where the Rockets roster is at heading into next season. Don't get me wrong, it's probably unlikely for Houston to make a playoff push, but anything can happen in the NBA, and I don't mind my bias getting in the way here. The Rockets core has a really bright future. And if Houston does suck again, the next draft class is looking really good, with a ton of guys reclassifying, plus other great prospects like Shai Holmgren. If Houston does well, that's great, but hey, in this situation, it won't be too bad losing either. But again, as a Rockets fan, I'm willing to get my hopes up a bit. And with the Rockets ticking off the boxes they needed to tick off at the end of last season, I'm pretty pumped going into 2022 and have thorough belief that at the very least, the Houston Rockets will be a competitive side next season. And that will conclude the video. What do you guys think of this? How good will the Houston Rockets be next season? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop it a like and subscribe. But with that being said, I am out. Peace.